The Story of Reynard, Book 3, Reynard's Defence. Chapter 1. Isegrim raises his outcry.
"Your Majesty,"
said Isegrim. The wolf took a deep breath, like a crowd orator who has much to say. The rocks of Reynard had never seen such a great concourse. Below the king's cave, which overhung a wide terrace dominating the plain, the citizens of the kingdom, whose size, daring or strength gave them most importance, sat together in a crowded semicircle. Bamber was there, holding on high his slender head with his golden eyes and magnificent crown of antlers. His elegance, the long muscular lines of his body, his proud carriage and his glowing eyes were those of a truly royal beast. But King Noble had his claws in addition. There was also Lord de la Fouille's black bull, the colossal snorter, with the hair curling over his forehead and the light rippling over his body. There was Besant, the old solitary boar, white-haired and shaggy, his long ivory tusks lying like daggers across his snout, which was as black as night, and the enormous Bruin was there, with his round ears, seated on his broad hindquarters in order to hide his disgraceful taillessness. And Grimbart the badger sat in the very first row, attentive and silent, while the two rams and Platter the goat and many others were lost among the crowd. But who was not at Reynard on that day? Every branch and every stone bore some creature, the asp on the flat rock, and Tibbet on the oak tree branch just above the lion, and the birds, the hares from the woods and the fields, the shy rabbits with their white tails, the red partridges, the grey partridges, the green lizard and the squirrel. They were all there, sitting by the clumps of heather or reeds, behind the screen of hanging leaves and the small clouds drifting against the sky. Summer reigned over the trees and the plain. Its triumphant light brought splendour to the entire domain of King Noble. This consisted of an airy, luxuriant forest glade lying just beyond the rocky gorge, which forbade access to it. Nowhere were the trees finer, with stronger trunks and wider branches. Nowhere was the bracken more graceful and firm. Nowhere was its green more soft and golden. The air itself seemed more transparent and pure. Noble, lying on the stone, his head resting on his paws, revealed himself to the gaze of his subjects in all his power and beauty. His slightest movement, or his very breathing, sent nervous tremors running below his smooth gleaming skin, along his shoulders and sides, until every muscle quivered. And yet he was motionless, his gaze lost in space, as though to retain for a moment the light in his eyes, which was still remote, vague, and too strong to bear. At the foot of the terrace, between the rock and the audience, a semicircular arena blazed in the fierce sunshine. There stood the wolf, his face peevish, his eyes red and his hair bristling down his spine and round his neck. Beside him was Lady Ursa, her attitude modest and restrained, her eyes fixed obstinately on the ground, and everyone realised how much at this time she feared the gaze of any living creature, whatever its expression.
"This is what I want to say,"
Isegrim began. And he spoke. For a long time. He had much to say. He was long-winded and his fury knew no bounds. But no prosecuting counsel, no devil's advocate would have revealed such absurdity, stupidity, and shame. And how great were the majesty and prestige of King Noble, and the fear that he inspired, which made the entire assembly remain in dignified silence. The lion seemed to be lost in a dream. In this way nobody could suspect the secret pleasure he took in listening to Isegrim's plea, or the loud laughter that he restrained from time to time with a great effort. For a king's life is hard. His official jesters are stilted professional entertainers, and they are usually tedious and wearisome. But a deceived wolf, seething with rage and boiling with eloquence, made a wonderful clown.
"My wife, your Majesty!"
cried Isegrim.
"My spouse, the mother of my children, with this stinking red dwarf!"
And he jumped up and down as though the earth beneath his feet were red-hot iron glowing in a forge. And he ground his teeth, his sharp muzzle moving round the crowd, his burning gaze picking quarrels with the birds and challenging the wind. For the assembly, following the king's example, remained strangely silent. Like the king, the animals were torn between conflicting feelings: indignation, embarrassment, and pity in the presence of Lady Ursa, and the desire to laugh uproariously, to express the laughter which contracted their stomachs.
At my home, your majesty, in my own den, in my lair at Gallerand, in the presence of my sons, who are already well grown.
"Enough!" bellowed a voice that startled the whole assembly. It was Snorter, the black bull. In the end he could bear it no longer. "By my horns!" he bellowed, stamping the ground with his hoof. "If such an absurd adventure had happened to me, though may God preserve me from such a thing, I would be my own arbitrator, my own respondent, my own judge, and if necessary my own executioner. What a cowardly and unworthy husband to drag this wretched mate here, whether she is guilty or not."
"Guilty! Guilty!"
howled Isegrim.
"On one occasion, if I can believe my own eyes. And why should I not believe them, since they saw execrable and vicious female, so well versed in deceit and lies? I almost believed her and her impudent denials, even more than you, my lord. I detest Reynard the fox, the importunate, persistent, and shameless creature. But why should I trouble you with him, this miserable verminous midget? Surely I am big enough myself, too big by far, if that is your fear, for his size and his designs."
He was interrupted by a hoarse braying, almost as loud as Snorter's bellow. "Your Majesty!" cried Bamber the stag. "Is it not enough that this dog-like wretch, killer of fawns and destroyer of sheep, should inflict his jumping and shouting on your eyes and ears?"
"I want to tell everything,"
Isegrim howled more loudly than ever.
"And if it costs me more, your majesty, than fighting and bloodshed, you can judge at this price my submission and respect. Does Snorter think I am afraid of Reynard? And does Bamber believe Snorter? If the fox has friends here, so have I, and let each one of you remember it. We will count them on both sides."
And, turning towards the she-wolf, he went on again.
Remember, lady, you said to me, 'We'll chase him together, and I shall lead the chase.' Lead it indeed, wanton. You pursued him more hotly than I did. They led me astray, both of them. They deceived me and laughed at me. I, Isegrim, I, the wolf, I."
Noble yawned interminably. In this way he could close his eyes and conceal the delight that gleamed within them. "I take note that this incident occurred," he said in the end. "It is much ado about nothing, but if you insist, very well, you were deceived and laughed at. We believe what you say."
"But I haven't had my revenge,"
howled Isegrim.
"Let this stinking wretch be handed over to us, to Bruin, Tibbert, and myself, and let justice—"
His frenzy continued to mount. The hair on his thigh stood on end continually, and if it occasionally lay flat, it soon bristled again, and he danced and swaggered about unendingly in the blazing sun, for Ursa had gradually won over the ranks of those present, and had taken refuge between Grimbart and the gloomy Besant. "Your Majesty," said the solitary old boar, "what would be your opinion of a judge who pronounced sentence after hearing only one side of the case? Isegrim has said his say, I assume. Send a message to Reynard and summon him at once. Let him come and appear here, for we wish to hear him too." "Be praised, Besant," said King Noble then, "for saying something sensible at last. And you, wise, careful Grimbart, if you go in search of Reynard—" "Reynard?" cried a cheerful voice. "Why summon Reynard? Here I am!" And the fox jumped onto the arena 2 paces away from Sir Isegrim.